Okay. So we've already gone over this. See that up there? Who is that? Like I said, drugs. Here I am later climbing out of, this is in the desert devil's hole pupfish, the little tiny fish that are endangered. And I went there one time, so I'm climbing out of there. It's pretty cool, actually, but let's see. Oh, don't worry about that. I already told you what needs to be done. Okay. I'm going to start over here. If I point to you, it means that you survive. The ones I don't point to means you're all dead. Okay? You're alive. Okay? You're going to, unfortunately, you're going to lose all your brothers and sisters to disease, but you're going to survive to adulthood. You're going to have, let's say, 10 kids, but only maybe one survives to adulthood. It's pretty bad. I know you're going to cry, you know. And then, by the time you're 30, you're going to look like an old woman, your teeth are going to fall out, and you're going to wish you were dead. And then you are going to be dead. Okay? You're going to survive. You're going to make it out of adulthood. You look like you're a pretty big dude. So you're going to survive because you can beat up everybody else. Okay? And women like you. And so you're going to have lots of women, many wives. You're going to lock them in a cave so that other people can't get them. Unfortunately, part of your culture is kind of eternal warfare between one clan and another, and so you're always going out fighting, and eventually, by the time you're 25, you get a spear through the heart, and you're dead. But in the meantime, you fathered 15 offspring. High fitness. Okay? You survived. You. Raise your hand. High fitness. You only have 2 offspring. Unfortunately, you died during childbirth. Happens all the time. You survived, but the ladies just don't like you. And the men intimidate you. And so you're always on the outside looking in. 0 offspring. But a good long life. No one really wants to kill you because you're really not a competitor. So you actually live until you're like 65. But you've never had sex. All the way up to here and back. You all died from a plague. Oh, just gone. Dead, didn't do it. This group, you made it with a Neanderthal. And your offspring, you have daughters. It turns out males on a hybrid mating between a modern human and a Neanderthal, the males usually don't survive. The females do. Okay? And then you have a bunch of other kids, just so you know. You become an old matriarch. Okay? Not only do you have lots of offspring, but people go to you because you've seen everything. Everything. They can go and say, so what happened when there was that famine? How did you survive? Well, I was good at pilfering, stealing, that sort of thing. Okay? So, everybody who survived, raise your hand. Okay. Okay. Everybody else died. Now, does that happen nowadays, for the most part? No. But 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago, perhaps only 20% of babies made it out of childhood. They died of diseases, or they died during childbirth. It was brutal. That doesn't happen anymore. Also, if you, it's time to go, but I want you to think about that before you come to class the next time, about how things have changed, and perhaps come up with some ideas about why things have changed. Because, you know, now, what's the average lifespan?
65.
80 maybe.
80?
Yeah. Yep. Back in the day, some people lived that long, but it was a very small crowd. Okay, thanks.
Sir, I'm trying to capture the class.
Okay.
I'm on the wait list.
Okay, you're on the wait list?
Yeah.
Okay. It'll automatically add you as soon as a spot opens up. I would still come to class. Usually in 3 weeks, there's a lot of people who actually drop. Okay? So, I mean, we're limited here in terms of the number of seats that are available. But there's a good probability that you're going to end up in the class. Okay?
And so, you had so many interviews.
All of you are trying to get in?
I'm already in. I just have a question. I want to know when you're going to see this.
Oh, I'm going to try to get
Can you make Canvas available?
that stuff up, well, for sure this week.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm a little behind the 8 ball. Sorry about that.
And what about the email for the links for the programs?
What?
Downloaded the email you said you'd send us with all the links to the programs.
When all those things are ready, I'll send out a class email and everybody will get
Thank
that.
you so much.
Pretty high. Yeah, yeah. I mean, people drop the class. Okay? The wait list, you're automatically added every time a place comes open.
Okay.
Okay? So keep looking and keep coming to class. Because, and if you want, well, you can email me at my email, mbeck@csun.edu, and just to let me know. But you'll be on the wait list. So it's good.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
sure.
If we're on the wait list, how do we get the stuff when you put it on? Because I'm number 1 of the list, so
Oh, what'll happen is if someone drops the class, it will automatically add you if you're number 1 on the wait list. Okay? So there's a good chance that you're in.
So I actually have a class tomorrow too.
Yeah.
I came here, so I need this 11 o'clock class Monday.
Yeah.
So just sort of waitlisted. And
So you want to, which one do you want to really do?
the 11 o'clock.
Today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tomorrow 3:30 to 4:30.
Right. What, so you're on the wait list for this? For this class, you want to, you want, or are you not?
I'm not, so I'm not waitlisted.
Yeah, let's see, what do you do? I don't want you to, send me an email, okay? And make sure you're explicit about what's going on, I'll find out. Because, I don't want you to have to drop that class and then hope,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's, a little dangerous, okay? Okay.
Oh, okay, so I'm in a little predicament. I was in this class, I got dropped because tuition. I got my tuition done, but it won't let me waitlist or get back into the class. So
Oh, I have to give you,
a permission thing.
yeah, okay.
Because I was in it, I was good, and then I got dropped
Because you didn't have,
because my FAFSA didn't pay my tuition.
that's what I thought, right,
And I
okay.
handled it.
Okay. Email me.
Okay, Maury, I didn't write it down.
It's mbeck,
Beck at.
csun.edu.
Can I use this?
Yeah, go. And make sure I respond back.
Is it M dot back or is it
Mbeck. Yeah, all one.
I'll for sure email you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Julia? Okay.
Also, expect the meetings to be posted along with email or afterwards?
Probably by next week. Okay. Okay? Sure. Okay. Here we are. Now, this is where we kind of left off. Oh, by the way, who lived from the last class? Anybody remember who was alive? Okay, good. A few of you. If you were born, let's say in Scandinavia, 500 years ago, you very well might have been born into a world like that, where only a few, most people died as either as infants, there was very high infant mortality, or by the time they were 5 years old. Either from poor nutrition or diseases, especially digestive diseases and intestinal and respiratory. Those are the same things that actually kill a lot of infants in undeveloped countries, like in Africa, certain countries in Africa. But let's say 500 years ago, that was the norm. And then the unlucky few who actually survived, I'm saying unlucky, because life was misery back then. It was hard, there wasn't enough food usually, or there were certainly times of famine. All kinds of things could kill you that today we don't even think about. And then if you had reached adulthood, maybe you had kids, and those kids, of course, not many would survive. And you yourself would rarely survive to actually see your kids reach maturity unless they get married or something like that. The average lifespan was about 30 years old, but that's a little squishy. Most of the mortality was because of youngsters figuring into that number, the average lifespan. Let's say you made it to 10 years old, then the average lifespan went up to probably about 40. Okay? Occasionally, someone would live until, let's say, their 60s or 70s or even 80s or 90s, like today, but only a very, very small proportion of the total population. So, what's the average lifespan today? Does anybody know? 80? Yeah, about that. Okay, so that figure actually incorporates infant mortality and all that, which is now a very small percentage of mortality. Most individuals who are born actually survive. Compared to, in the past, it was what? Like maybe 20% survived until adulthood. Now, the majority do. Unless, of course, something unlucky happens or they are born with a genetic disease, something like that. Why has that changed? Anybody?
Like medicines.
Modern medicine?
The food is better.
What?
The food is better. People are eating more.
Better food? Mm-hmm.
Advancements in technology.
Advances in technology? Anything else? Yeah? Sanitation. Right. All these things are, some of them are a little older than others. So, sanitation. Now, before, let's say, before 1850, there was not, they didn't have the germ theory of disease. The germ theory is that there are pathogens, we call them microbes, whether they're bacteria or viruses or fungi, that can cause disease. Most of them, by the way, don't. And for the most part, we're protected because of our immune systems. But there was this idea that actually that people were not healthy because they had these four humors that were associated with the four, what were they? Fundamentals like earth, air, fire, and water. And if these got out of balance, you got sick. Or people believed at the same time that maybe someone put a curse on you, and that's why you got sick. People, of course, had no idea. Now, people did know, because microscopes were invented a couple of hundred years previously, that there were these very small things like bacteria, but they hadn't quite put it together. Actually, some people had surmised it back in the 1500s, and even earlier, the Greeks. But for the most part, the germ theory didn't actually become accepted until the late 1800s. Medicine as it was advancing, some people, there was a guy named John Snow in London, and there was a cholera outbreak, and it seemed to be centered on this one well. And so he went in and he traced all the victims. And then he told the city fathers and all that, you have to close this well because this well is the cause of the outbreak of cholera. And it was true, and they did, and it actually stopped the cholera outbreak. So from then on, sanitation became more and more important, and once people realized that microbial pathogens, like I said, whether they're viruses or bacteria or whatever, were causing disease, they started putting two and two together about cleanliness and sanitation. Whether it's the water supply, the food supply, or in hospitals, let's say. My grandma, she's dead, died a long time ago. But when she was growing up, women were terrified of going to the hospital to give birth because the obstetricians and no one else really realized that there were bacteria everywhere, and these were the cause of major infections for the mother and the child. That gradually changed over time. So once that started happening, mortality went down, survival went up, and let's say by the early 1900s, the average lifespan was about 45. So it had gone up from 30 to 45. There was less infant mortality, better food supply, and then it increased all the way through the 20th century. And then modern medicine came along. And I have to tell you, really before World War II, modern medicine didn't do much. First of all, doctors made house calls, so that was nice. They'd come in, they'd do palpations and a bunch of other things, but they didn't have very many things they could use to actually treat, like, let's say, infections. There were essentially no antibiotics except for sulfa drugs, and they weren't very effective. After World War II, though, the first antibiotics came out. And common diseases or infections that normally would have made people really sick or killed them suddenly no longer did. So if you looked at this digit right here, compared to this one, you would realize it's pretty swollen. A week ago, it was really big, and I had an infection, right? Now, this infection, if left untreated, would have been probably pretty serious. I at least would have lost a finger, and it's likely I would have gotten a systemic blood poisoning with the bacteria. But I started taking antibiotics for it, and it's slowly going down, right? So I could go, hi. In the past, those things would kill people, and now they don't. Of course, there's antibiotic resistance that you've probably all heard about, but all in all, there's all these new technologies, including the biggest killer. Well, in the past, acute things like infections or accidents, those kinds of things are the things that kill people. Not the chronic things that kill people nowadays, namely in old age, namely heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, whatever. People didn't live long enough to get those. They died of something else. New technology has been great in terms of starting to cure or at least reduce the symptoms from some of these chronic diseases. In the past, like heart disease, my dad had a heart attack when he was 46. Bad genes, but I've been fine because I just don't eat like he did. He was diabetic, and he thought like the best diet for a diabetic was a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich at midnight. Okay? I don't believe that. I still enjoy bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches, but I don't eat them every day. Right? I'm not on a paleo diet, by the way, because in the past, the one thing they don't add to a paleo diet is a prolonged famine, right, where no one eats for, let's say, 2 months because there's no food. Now, if they actually added that to the paleo diet, that would be pretty cool. Of course, people would die of malnutrition, right, and not getting enough calories. Okay, So nowadays, it's chronic diseases, and those diseases are slowly being cured. So the average lifespan is now 80. There's also a lot of other things going on. Think of all the stuff you're wearing and all the stuff you brought to class and all the things that you use in your life. There's all this technology that's just kind of amazing that makes life a lot easier. First of all, in the past, you grew up on a farm and you maybe went to town 20 miles away once every 2 weeks. And you didn't do much traveling unless you were a little richer and had some money, and then you might do a tour of Europe or something. Well, nowadays you can travel much more easily. There's advanced communication, right? We all have cell phones and smartphones that keep us occupied. So, the question is, why am I asking you about all this and telling you these various things about the fact that lifespan is older, is much longer than it used to be? Are there any ideas about what my motivation might be? Yeah.
To bring up the concept of survival of the fittest.
Okay, that's one thing, certainly. So we're talking about evolution and fitness, and evolutionary fitness is surviving long enough to reproduce, and then reproducing like rabbits, right? I already told you about that, and how I'd be very happy that all of you get pregnant or make someone pregnant and have lots of babies by the end of the semester, because that's what God wants you to do. No, don't do that. Okay. So, fitness, the fitness landscape has changed. Sources of mortality in the past that used to kill us are gone. So that's one of the reasons that fitness overall for the whole population has actually increased. Doesn't mean that our genes have actually changed all that much. It's just that we've removed sources of mortality. So another reason, a more practical reason than just survival of the fittest. Where did all this stuff about modern medicine and sanitation,
Adapting maybe?
adapting?
Yeah.
Okay, that's more fitness, yeah.
It came from like a greater understanding of biology,
Okay, and where did that come from?
studying like organisms.
So people were studying these things, right? Where'd they get the money for studying these things? Anybody? They just started doing it? Or where is most of the research done? Yeah? Government. Okay. Now, this gets kind of to the heart of why I'm asking you this. Everything, the whole reason that you are alive right now, and I'm alive, is because of modern medicine and modern technology. And prior to World War II, most of the great research was actually being done in Europe, whether it was physics, chemistry, medicine, all kinds of different things. America was a bit of a backwater. There were some institutions that were trying to get better and better people. But it was only when World War II started and all these scientists left Europe to come here that the modern educational institutions kind of came up to speed. And a lot more universities, teaching as well as research, were created. And of course, you're here now because of that. All these great advances have been basically funded by government in the form of grants by either national institutions or state or private institutions, right? So there's been a lot of money, billions and billions and billions of dollars that that went toward these things. Unfortunately, in the last 15 years, especially the last 10, government hasn't been doing that. People have been worried about a bunch of other things, wars and various things. And the kind of money that we're actually spending on research has really gone down. So I just want you to understand that later on, when you start vote, anybody in here vote now, or some people do, a lot of people probably don't. But maybe as you get older, you realize that this has consequences, especially in terms of, let's say, modern medicine. Because most people don't realize what it used to be like, or what it's like in some countries like Africa, continents like Africa, other poor countries, okay, India. So I just kind of want to set that idea in your head for the rest of this class. Because I want this class to help you, first of all, understand biology, but also how it actually affects your life, and how you can use your biological knowledge or knowledge about science to help yourself navigate what healthy, let's say, health and healthy behavior versus quackery, right? Quackery, I mean quack doctors, quack, quack. In fact, there was a recent one, there's a bunch of these clinics now that are popping up all over called stem cell clinics. And stem cells we'll get to, they're these cells that can supposedly turn into all different kinds of cells. Well, there's a lot of these doctors that decide, oh, we can inject stem cells into people who have, let's say, chronic knee pain, and that the stem cells will help the knee to heal properly. Unfortunately, they get most of the stem cells from the patient's own fat cells. And adult stem cells can only turn into adult tissue that's already been programmed, so fat stem cells can't turn into muscle stem cells or whatever like that. So there was a case where they were injecting fat stem cells into patients' eyes who had, let's say, macular degeneration, thinking that that would help the retina heal. Well, all it did was make people blind, okay? Now, if you read this and you say, oh, I've got, let's say your elderly aunt has macular degeneration, you think, or she thinks, this would really help, you might want to actually tell her that actually this is quackery, okay? And it really won't help her. In fact, she'll just probably go blind unless something really bad happens, and then she'll die, okay? So those are the kinds of things I actually want you to kind of get from the class. Okay. Okay, so basically, biology is the study of life. Like physics is the study of the material world, whether it's matter or energy. Everything from the smallest things like subatomic particles all the way up to the universe that we're in, and maybe beyond that. Chemistry is also a major science, and looking at the different elements and molecules and how to understand what characteristics they have, how you can combine things, all sorts of interesting things. And basically, biology is a combination of chemistry and physics. Okay? There's a lot of different things in biology. I've listed a whole bunch of them here. evolution, so life evolves. That means it changes over time. Individuals don't so much change, they don't evolve, but populations of individuals do. We'll get to that later. Phylogenetic systematics, that's a wonderful, long, jargony phrase or words, and it just means the relationships between all living organisms alive today. And it looks like every single one of them descended from one common ancestor, because all organisms that have ever been found on the earth use the same genetic code. And that's the only explanation that would give rise to everything using DNA. Okay. Ecology is the interaction between organisms and their environment, whether it's their abiotic environment, like the temperature, the elevation, the microbes that are in their environment, the other organisms in their environment, the social environment. This is actually an environment. And there's a social environment here too, as well. Besides you listening to me, which is going to get boring here in a second, there's other things going on. I can guarantee that some of you are checking each other out for possibly hooking up. Now, that's just, look, they're looking around, right? You're always, when you're at every age, it's just the way it is, okay? You've got friends. This is a social environment, and that affects the interactions that you have. Some friends are more trustworthy than others. Others are, fair weather friends. Everything's going great, and then when it all hits the fan, they stab you in the back. Okay. Development. It turns out that usually organisms start out differently than they end up. And so they develop over time. And that can include their anatomy, physiology, behavior as well. We're going to talk about cell theory, genetics, and then physiological homeostasis. That means mechanisms that keep us living and not falling apart and dying because something goes awry. Okay. So science is something called epistemology, and that means the theory of knowledge. How do we gain knowledge? And you're actually here in school, and there's a whole bunch of disciplines for actually gaining knowledge. Some of you are taking history. Some of you are taking business, economics. Some of you taking art. These are all ways to gain knowledge, and science is one of them. Okay? Now, when I was growing up in the 60s, there was a lot of, there's always been a lot of what I call magical thinking. Belief in the supernatural, things like that, that's still going on, obviously. Back then it was helped by these hallucinogenic drugs. And so people believed, and they still do, the wildest things. In fact, we think of ourselves, anybody know what rational means? Anybody? What do you think? What's rational compared to irrational? How do you make decisions?
Isn't it based on your bias?
What?
Isn't it based on your bias?
Bias, okay. Now, is that part of rationalism or irrationalism? Hmm? Both? Okay. Hmm?
I guess it would be considered the common, agreement that everybody is we all agree. Most of us agree that the Earth is round, and so the rational answer to the Earth is flat is no.
Yeah. And okay, yeah.
Well, rationalism is just using that your beliefs are just based in reason.
reason. So it's based on reason and evidence, yeah?
You don't really let your emotions get in the way of your decisions. You really look at it from like a logistical point
Yeah.
of view.
Yeah, that's true. So, emotions, now, I have to say, sometimes rationalism will get you in trouble versus emotions will save your life. Suppose a monster came through the door. If you sat there thinking rationally, what should I do? It might take too long and you would get grabbed by the monster. Whereas, your first initial response would be basic terror. And you try to run out. Now, of course, that might be bad because you might trample each other, but in general, those kinds of responses are good. Okay? But rationalism is basically, it's based on reason and empiricism, which means that we go out and we look for evidence, and that evidence can be used to test explanations. It also involves skepticism. That means not believing everything that you read, like the quack stem cell doctors that are popping up and causing havoc with a lot of people. Skepticism is not the same as pessimism, where you think, if you're a pessimist, it means that, oh, everything sucks and it's only going to get worse, right? Now, science is a way of getting at what we call the truth, or as close to the truth as we possibly can. In fact, in the philosophy of science, you actually can't perhaps know the real truth. But you can test explanations to see which is more likely as an explanation. So, what's a good definition of science? Anybody? How about you? What's a good definition of science? I know you can say something. It doesn't matter. Remember, oh, you're probably a little shy. I know. Everybody around you, just think of them as cats. Okay? They don't understand anything you're going to say. Right? You don't like cats? I didn't mean, okay. Okay, good. You don't like cats. So I want you to ignore the cats. And just think about, you've heard about science. For example, what does science do? Huh? Study, okay. And what kind of stuff does it study? Wait. I want her to talk, and you're just a cat. Okay. Okay. Get the cat. So what kind of things do we study? The environment, okay. The environment is big, so it can include everything, including all the things in the universe. Okay? That's good. See, it wasn't so bad, especially when you're surrounded by cats. Okay. Okay, so we study the environment. Anything else?
Studying things we don't understand.
Okay. Okay, but don't we do the same thing with history?
Yes.
Okay, so studying things we don't understand is kind of a broad. What's the difference between history and science?
Well, history is kind of like the past and stuff that's happened, so
Mhm.
it's definitely fact.
Yeah.
But like science proposes a question, I suppose, and it's up to like scientists, I guess, to like understand if that's true or not.
Okay. Okay, so science will say that it investigates okay. Okay, so we mentioned something about a question, right? Okay, so with science, we usually start with a question. And where do you think the question comes from?
Assumptions.
Huh?
Assumptions.
Assumptions? Okay. Anything else?
Observations.
Observations? Anything else?
Problems?
Problems? Okay. So we're starting with a question. Let's see here. What's that? Oh, I know. Oh, Oh, that's right, okay.